of Christian churches and hotels in Sri Lanka, with more than 250 dead, and with ISIS claiming responsibility, along with the fact that at least some of the terrorists came from affluent families and had good educations. What is the message that we're receiving? And is what happened in Sri Lanka a stark warning to Western nations to not repatriate their citizens who abandoned their homelands to join and terrorize for ISIS? You know that there have been and continue to be calls from people who left this country to join ISIS to be repatriated, and who knows what's going to happen. The Prime Minister has said that he thinks some ISIS returnees could contribute greatly to Canada as far as de-radicalization is concerned. Well, whatever. I know that my next guest, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, the founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, the author of Battle for the Soul of Islam, past president of the Arizona Medical Association, and former lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, would not agree with that assessment by Mr. Trudeau. Zuhdi, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, it's always great to be with you, Roy. Thanks for having me back.
Let's go to the to the news, and it's been more than less confirmed. ISIS behind the massive bombing attack in Sri Lanka. What do we make of that?
Well, this was Sri Lanka's 9/11, their civil war, which was not an Islamist war, but was factions of the Tamils versus the Buddhists, had ended 10 years ago, and they thought they were sort of saved from the global jihad. And I think we realize that as the Islamists of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and others will always reshape and reform themselves as a hydra, the global jihad continues, and it's stronger than it's ever been. There's been some rebranding. ISIS shifted itself from Syria and Iraq, where it's now been decimated, to we saw a bombing in Kabul a month ago. We saw an attack attempt in Saudi Arabia. In Congo, they've formed themselves, and now this horrific attack against the Christian minority in Sri Lanka. They will use every opportunity to send messages, as this did on Easter Sunday, and find countries in which they're able to do things because of opportunity and vulnerability. So, you know, they divide the world into the land of Islam and the land of war. And while they've no longer been able to succeed in Syria and Iraq, where it was the land of Islam, now they're continuing to push out again in the areas of war and areas where Muslims are a minority, like Sri Lanka or in the West. They will continue to attack us until we have an offense. And, Roy, we don't have an offense. There is no offense for the promotion of liberty and ideas of freedom. And like you said, yet we're being weak when it comes to those who declare war against us. We actually invite them back in to supposedly help us, when in fact we're losing the ideological war miserably.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact, and we know, and there's been some great reporting done by Stuart Bell on Global News in Canada. He's one of the best investigative reporters, particularly when it comes to these issues. And he's talked to unrepentant members of ISIS who are being held captive by the Kurds. But there are former ISIS members who left this country, left the United States, left Australia, left France, left the UK, left Germany, and they are now being held captive by the Kurds, and the Kurds don't want to keep them anymore, and they want the Western countries to take them back. What's the threat level? Because these people are saying, we want to come back, we understand the errors of our ways, we didn't know what we were getting into, please let us come home. What do you say?
I say not only absurd, but they should be brought back for war crimes and on death row for treason. There's no discussion about them coming back to help de-radicalization. That is absurd. They're educated Islamists who have a worldview that's against what we stand for in secular liberal democracies, and it is an affront to Muslims and Canadians alike that love their country to say that these war criminals should be brought back. And to call them simply brides is absurd. These are war criminals that helped assist in the slavery of other women and in war crimes against minorities, Yazidis, and others. There's videos now coming out that some of them didn't just sit by and they're not victims. They signed on ideological to the war against Christians and minorities in the West, and they should not even, it shouldn't even be considered to bring them back. And it is beyond idiocy to think they can help us in counter-radicalization when, in fact, the worldview of Islamists sees their establishment of governments as theocracies, while they see us as living in the land of hedonism and sin.
So why then, and I've gotten tired, by the way, Zudi, and I know you know that, we've talked about this, but I've gotten tired, you've gotten tired, others have gotten tired of the verbal drivel that comes out of the mouths of our supposed leaders when there is an attack of proportion and people are harmed, people are killed. They talk about unity and the fight against terrorists, and it's the usual verbal pablum that means exactly nothing. Why is this continuing? Is it just a lack of will? What's going on?
Because many of the platforms are just run by folks that really don't love the West, that really hate Christianity, so they call them Easter worshipers, as President Obama and Hillary Clinton described Christians that were massacred, and yet after New Zealand's attack, they reflected on the need to unite with Muslims and protect their faith worship. So this upside-down world where they treat us Muslims in a bigotry of low expectations, and then the majority gets mistreated, is offensive and actually empowers the radicals to say, oh, the West is weak, we have vulnerability. And by the way, the cell that committed the act in Sri Lanka, it should not go past anybody that they were photoed and working with Sheikh Kardawi, who is one of the lead guides of the Global Muslim Brotherhood. This is not just some small cell. It was radicalized by global Islamists from Qatar, from the Brotherhood and on, and to say that they don't see us as weak in the way we approach our own religious freedoms of Christians and Jews and others is to say that you really don't understand the pathway of radicalization.
Before we talk, Zudi, about the revelation or the information that some of the terrorists who were involved in that mass murder in Sri Lanka were well-educated individuals, I want to go back to something that you said, and it troubled me. I've been off for 3 weeks because I had surgery and I just couldn't sit in the studio for 3 hours. But it troubled me when I heard or read. I guess I read it first and then I heard it. Former President Obama and former Secretary of State and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, as you pointed out, talked about the people who were attacked, terrorized, killed as Easter worshipers. What is that? Why do they do that?
And you know it's coordinated, Roy, because whoever called them Easter worshipers, it was contrived. And the reason they contrive it is they idiotically believe if they call them Christians, they're feeding into this global clash of religions. When in fact, that is the ideology of the Islamists. They feel they're at war with all non-Muslims and moderate Muslims and Christians and Jews and others. So we need to call it what it is, empower Muslims to be a part of liberty societies, free societies. And if we don't call it what it is, it actually comes across as profound weakness. I can tell you, as the son of Arab immigrants from Syria, the Arab mindset, the Islamist mindset feeds off of a sense of weakness. And if they see their enemy not able to identify them as what they are, they see that as an opening, and that's why the left will continue to lose this battle. That's why they're part of the radicalization process and what I call the red-green axis, and yet they do it. At best, answers out of naivete. At worst is because they can't stand the faith of Christianity in the West, and they actually prefer other cultures for some reason.
Now let's talk about. I'd like your thoughts on the fact that we've been told that some of these terrorists, some of these homicide bombers, were actually well-educated young people from fairly affluent families. What does that speak to?
Well, I think every time we do this, it's like Groundhog Day movie where we re-educate people that these people are all educated. They're very educated. Osama bin Laden on Al Jazeera a couple years after 9/11 said that basically Islam is not about prayer and worship and fasting. It's about encompassing all areas of life, including education, religious and worldly affairs, economic, military, and political affairs. So here you have an educated billionaire that was radicalizing and created Al-Qaeda, and yet we're still trying to wonder that these somehow are just aggrieved, poor people that need jobs. And that's not true. It's a worldview that is fascistic, theopolitical, that these guys were getting taught by imams and clerics about a version of Islam that wants to dominate and destroy. And just like most successful mass movements, as the left has learned in its own history, the ones that are successful are the ones that want to die for their movement. So this is why in our American Islamic Forum, we want to work with kids that want to die for America, that want to join our military and believe in protecting this society. Because it's not about education, It's about wanting to die for jihad. And unless we want to have Muslims that are against jihad, we're going to continue to see a quarter of the world's population being the constituency for radical Islamism. And the most educated will be the ones that will be the first to strap on belts and decide to be part of the radical movement, because they want, to them, this life is short. It's about going to, I believe, hell, but they ultimately believe it's about going to heaven and being part of the jihad.
Do you see any determination from Western nations, from Western alliances, to do what you're telling us is necessary to be done?
I don't. I mean, even on the conservative right, we see folks that are militarily strong. Finally, Trump allowed us to defeat ISIS, and militarily, our whack-a-mole program is now more potent than ever. We're doing the right thing against Iran. But ideologically, I don't see us looking at the U.S. Information Agency is still abandoned. Public diplomacy programs are abandoned. We're not unashamedly doing what the Russians and Khomeini and others are doing and advancing their ideas and the Islamist ideas into the West. We don't have the same programs going into the Muslim consciousness. So until we take an offense, we're going to continue to play defense against whatever crops up this week and next week from radical Islamists, because the deeper problem, Roy, is the Irans and even our allies, the Saudis of the world, working sometimes with China, working with our enemies, and not caring about sort of the byproduct of terror that comes out of that.
Now, when you said words to this effect, not those words, but when you made this argument before the Canadian Parliament, when you were invited to address the hearings on M103, you were described as, what was the word?
An Islamophobe.
That's right. You, the son of Syrian refugees in the United States, you were attacked.
Yeah, and the red-green axis, the axis of the socialists of the world and the Islamists, as we see in the UN, say anyone who's against them are bigots. And even we saw Foreign Policy magazine describe the King of Saudi Arabia as an Islamophobe, which is the biggest joke. And the reason they did that is the Islamists now are at war internally with the monarchs and the ruling class, the corporate Islamists, if you will. And now it's starting to reveal for everyone that the label of Islamophobe is not about being anti-Islam. It's about being anti-Islamist against sort of the viral theopolitical movement of this socialist-type ideology.
Zuhdi, we've run out of time. It always happens. And I thank you so much for the time. I'll just go talking to you.
Thank you, Ray.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser